My name is Gwen, 33 years old, and at 6 in the morning, my banking app flashed a bright red access denied error. My entire life savings, exactly $700,000, had been frozen overnight. I called my mother, but my father answered, his voice eerily calm as he told me they had to step in because family comes first. My mother chimed in, claiming I was not thinking clearly and needed them to manage my money. I did not argue or scream. Instead, I put on my sharpest black blazer, drove straight to the bank, and slapped my identification on the counter. The branch manager clicked his mouse once, turned his monitor toward me, and asked who had signed a power of attorney 4 days ago. Then he pulled up the digital metadata, and the room went completely silent when we saw the location of the signature. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had the people who share your blood try to bleed you dry. The lengths my family went to in order to steal my fortune will make your blood boil, but the way I used federal laws to dismantle their entire existence will leave you breathless. I work as a senior user interface and user experience designer for a major financial technology firm in Chicago. My entire professional life revolves around digital security, user authentication pathways, and financial software. I literally design the digital vaults that keep people safe. The irony that my own family thought they could bypass my security protocols is something that still astounds me. The money in that account was not inherited family wealth. It was the payout from a massive stock option grant I received when my first technology startup went public, combined with years of aggressive saving. It was my safety net and my absolute secret, or so I thought. When that access denied notification glared at me from my phone screen that Tuesday morning, my blood ran cold. The specific error code was an internal banking code I recognized instantly. It meant a primary account holder had initiated a full lock and asset transfer, pending a compliance review. But I had not initiated anything. I immediately dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring, sounding entirely too calm for such an early hour. "Mom, my trust account is locked," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Do you know anything about this?" I heard a rustling sound, and then my father Howard spoke through the speaker. He had clearly been waiting right next to her. "Gwen, lower your voice," Howard said, using his patented tone of condescending authority. "We had to step in. Family first. Your brother Bradley is going through a rough patch with his new venture, and we are simply reallocating family resources to ensure everyone stays afloat." "My resources are not family resources, Dad," I replied, the sheer audacity of his statement ringing in my ears. "That is my personal account." My mother Brenda chimed back, and her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Gwen, sweetheart, you are not thinking clearly. You have been working yourself into a state of paranoia lately. Let us manage it. We are just protecting your assets from your own impulsive behavior. We know what is best for the family." They had rehearsed this. They were trying to manipulate me into believing I was having a mental break, so they could justify draining my life savings. I realized instantly that screaming or crying would only give them the reaction they wanted. They needed me to sound hysterical to prove their point. I simply pressed the red end call button on my screen. I walked to my closet, pulled out my blazer, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to the downtown branch of my bank. I bypassed the standard teller line and walked directly to the office of Mr. Caldwell, the branch manager, who had personally overseen my high net worth accounts for the past 3 years. I set my driver license, passport, and physical Social Security card on his mahogany desk. "Mr. Caldwell, my primary portfolio was frozen at approximately 3 in the morning. I need a full diagnostic on the authorization protocols initiated." Caldwell frowned deeply, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Gwen, I saw the alert this morning. I assumed you were aware. We received a digitally notarized, durable power of attorney granting your father full signatory rights over your accounts." The document cited a medical incapacitation clause. A medical incapacitation clause? My own parents were genuinely trying to legally claim I was mentally unfit to control my own finances. pull up the metadata I instructed, rounding his desk to look at his computer monitor. I want the Internet Protocol address of the device that executed the digital signature, and I want the routing trace on the two-factor authentication text message intercept. Caldwell clicked his mouse once, turning the screen slightly. "Who signed this power of attorney 4 days ago?" he asked quietly. He pulled up the metadata. The address did not belong to my parents' home in the suburbs. It belonged to an internet service provider hub in Oak Park. "That is Bradley and Nia's house," I whispered, my eyes scanning the timestamp. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. My sister-in-law, Nia, is an African-American woman with an impeccable corporate wardrobe and a ruthless disposition. As a human resources director for a mid-sized logistics company, Nia handled highly sensitive digital employee records compliance forms and corporate authentications every single day. She knew exactly how digital notarization software worked, and she knew exactly how to exploit its loopholes. Together with my perpetually failing brother, she was the brain behind this entire operation. But to execute the transfer they needed the authentication code sent directly to my phone. How did they get it? The timeline of betrayal began to unfold. I remembered the family dinner at my parents' house last Sunday. My mother had insisted on hosting a celebratory dinner for Bradley and his supposedly upcoming business expansion. During dessert, Brenda had clumsily knocked a full glass of red wine directly onto my silk blouse. She had rushed me upstairs to the guest bathroom to treat the stain, leaving my purse and phone sitting unattended on the kitchen island for exactly 12 minutes. That was the window. 12 minutes was an eternity for someone like Nia. While Brenda kept me trapped in the bathroom scrubbing at a fabricated accident, Nia had executed the text message intercept. She initiated the authentication, received the verification code on my locked phone screen via the notification preview, typed it into her laptop, and swiped the notification away. It was a perfectly choreographed digital heist orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. I looked back at the screen in Caldwell's office. The power of attorney document was a masterpiece of corporate manipulation. Nia had used a legitimate digital notary platform, likely routing it through a shell account tied to her logistics company, to bypass the standard identity verification checks. The document explicitly granted my father full signatory rights over my accounts. It claimed I was undergoing severe psychological distress and required voluntary inpatient evaluation. They had essentially declared me legally incompetent without a single doctor's note, relying entirely on the automated efficiency of modern banking systems to push the paperwork through before any human compliance officer could review it. Caldwell watched my face harden. "Gwen, this is a severe breach. I can initiate an immediate fraud lockdown and reverse the power of attorney. The funds have not cleared yet." I held up my hand to stop him. "Wait," I said. "Where is the money right now?" Caldwell hit a few more keystrokes, his brow furrowing as he scanned the internal ledger. The entire $700,000 balance was initiated for a wire transfer at 4:15 this morning. However, it hit an anti-money laundering flag. The funds are currently sitting in a holding account pending manual review. They have not reached the destination yet. 3 years ago, when I set up the account, I had personally insisted on a back-end security measure. Any outbound transfer exceeding $100,000 to an unregistered external routing number required a 72-hour cooling-off period and an automatic anti-money laundering flag. My family thought they had successfully stolen the money, but in reality, they had simply triggered a silent alarm. "What is the destination routing number?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Caldwell adjusted his glasses and read the screen. "It is split. $250,000 is routed to a title escrow company based in Oak Brook. The remaining $450,000 is routed directly to an account held by the Department of the Treasury, specifically an IRS tax lien resolution portal." I stared at the monitor, the magnitude of their desperation finally making absolute sense. Bradley and his business venture were a complete lie. You do not wire $450,000 to the IRS for a startup company. You wire it to keep yourself out of federal prison. Nia was an executive. She must have been embezzling from her company or dodging massive federal taxes for years. The net was closing in on her, and my parents knew it. Howard and Brenda were willing to bankrupt their own daughter to keep their precious golden child and his wife out of federal custody and to buy them a luxury mansion to keep up appearances. They chose to destroy my life to protect their social standing. Mr. Caldwell, I said, stepping back from the desk, do not cancel the transfer. Do not alert them to the security flag. Let the system hold it exactly as it is. Caldwell looked shocked. Gwen, if I do not report this as fraud immediately and the cooling-off period ends, the money will be gone. If you cancel it now, I interrupted, they only committed attempted theft. They can brush it off as a family misunderstanding. My parents will hire expensive lawyers, claim I gave verbal permission while I was supposedly mentally unstable, and drag this through civil court for years while smearing my name across the city. I am not going to let them play the concerned parents card. I looked Mr. Caldwell dead in the eye. If they officially use stolen identity documents to wire funds across state lines to a federal agency that elevates this from a simple family dispute to federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, I need them to believe they won. I need them to hang themselves. Caldwell slowly nodded, understanding the sheer weight of what I was proposing. He knew my background in digital security and trusted my judgment. I will keep the freeze active on the back end. The funds will not move, but their user portal will show the transfer as processing. What are you going to do? I am going to a party, I said. I walked out of the bank into the crisp Chicago morning air. I got back into my car and checked my phone. The family group chat was active, flooding my screen with messages. Nia had texted first. Gwen, hope you are feeling better today. Mom said you were having some stress issues. We are all here for you. Do not forget the housewarming party at our new place today at 2 in the afternoon. Family only. Brenda immediately followed up. Yes, sweetheart, please come. We need to celebrate Bradley and his new chapter. Leave your work stress at home. They were absolutely euphoric. They believed the money was safely in their possession, funding their lavish new lifestyle and paying off whatever catastrophic legal trouble Nia had gotten herself into. They were hosting a party funded by my stolen life savings, and they had the sheer unadulterated sociopathy to invite me to it so they could play the role of the loving and supportive family. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind operating like a machine parsing lines of code. There was no room for grief. Grief is a luxury you afford yourself when a loved one dies. When your family tries to bury you alive, you do not grieve. You calculate. I put my car into drive and headed toward Oak Brook. As I navigated the morning traffic on the expressway, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold and razor-sharp clarity. As a financial software designer, I spend my days anticipating vulnerabilities, building encrypted walls to keep malicious actors out. I had designed systems that thwarted international hacking syndicates. Yet my own family had bypassed my personal security using the oldest trick in the book: social engineering. I played the events of that Sunday dinner back in my mind, deconstructing the two-factor authentication theft step by step. Naya had not just stolen a glance at my phone. She had orchestrated a coordinated physical breach. My mother spilling the wine was the distraction. The 12 minutes I spent scrubbing my silk blouse in the upstairs bathroom gave Nia physical access to my device. A locked phone still requires a passcode or facial recognition, but Nia did not need either. She had previously memorized my lock screen habits. I had text message notifications set to display previews. When the bank sent the 6-digit security code to authorize the forged power of attorney, the numbers flashed across my locked screen. Nia simply read the code, typed it into her laptop to authenticate the session, and swiped the notification away so I would never see the alert. It was terrifyingly simple and brutally effective. I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot halfway to Oak Brook. I needed to solidify my timeline and trace the exact trajectory of the pending wire transfer before confronting them. I picked up my phone and dialed Cole, a private investigator and former cybersecurity specialist I frequently consulted for my firm audits. He answered immediately. Cole. I need a deep trace on 2 routing numbers, I said, reading the digits Mr. Caldwell had provided me. I need to know exactly where these funds are heading and who holds the receiving accounts. This is an urgent priority. Give me 5 minutes, Cole replied, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the line. While I waited, I reviewed the legal parameters of what my family had just done. A forged power of attorney was a state-level fraud, but executing a digital transfer across state lines using stolen credentials was a federal offense. The moment those funds left my bank server and entered the federal clearing system, Nia and Bradley crossed a line they could never uncross. Cole came back on the line. I have your trace. The first routing number is connected to an escrow account managed by a luxury real estate brokerage in Oak Brook. The transaction notes specify a down payment for a residential property. The second number is where things get interesting. It routes directly to the United States Department of the Treasury, an IRS portal I confirmed. Exactly, Cole said. The tracking metadata attached to the transfer includes a specific taxpayer identification number. I ran a cross-reference. That number belongs to your sister-in-law, Naya. She has a massive pending tax lien. It looks like she is facing imminent federal seizure of assets. The picture was now perfectly clear. Nia was drowning in federal tax debt, likely from embezzling funds at her corporate job. The walls were closing in on her, and federal prison was a very real possibility. Bradley, possessing no actual business acumen, had gone to my parents in a panic. Howard and Brenda, terrified of the social disgrace of their golden child and his wife going to federal prison, decided that my life savings was an acceptable sacrifice. They stole my money to pay off Nia federal tax debt and secure a luxury mansion to maintain their facade of wealth. Are you going to cancel the transaction? Cole asked. You need to call your bank fraud department right now and pull the plug before the funds clear the holding account. No, I replied, my voice perfectly steady. I am not canceling it. Cole paused. Gwen, if you let that transfer process, the money is gone. Recovering funds from the IRS is a bureaucratic nightmare. It will not go that far, I explained. The transfer hit an internal anti-money laundering flag. The bank is holding the funds in a secure back-end vault for 72 hours. The money is frozen, but on Nia's end, the portal shows the transaction as processing. If I cancel the transfer right now, the bank simply rejects the request. Nia and my parents will claim it was a misunderstanding. They will say I gave them verbal permission and just forgot. They will hire expensive defense attorneys, drag me through civil court, and paint me as an unstable and vindictive daughter. I took a deep breath, staring out the windshield at the gray Chicago sky. I need them to fully commit to the crime. By leaving the transaction in a pending state, I am creating a controlled environment. I want them to sign the closing documents on that house today. I want them to officially submit that stolen money to the federal government. The moment they do, they are guilty of aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. I am not giving them a chance to back out. You are setting a federal trap. Cole realized a hint of respect in his voice. They set the trap, I corrected. I am just refusing to warn them before it snaps shut. Send me the documentation on Nia's tax lien. I am heading to their housewarming party right now. I ended the call and pulled out of the parking lot, merging back onto the highway toward Oak Brook. The drive gave me time to lock away the last remaining shreds of familial loyalty I held for Howard and Brenda. They had known. My parents had actively participated in a scheme to bankrupt me, viewing my hard-earned security as nothing more than a slush fund for their favorite son. They had calculated my worth and decided I was completely expendable. I turned onto the affluent tree-lined street of their new neighborhood. Massive estates with manicured lawns and wrought iron gates rolled past my windows. I pulled up to the sprawling 5-bedroom mansion Bradley and Nia were supposedly buying. Luxury cars already lined the circular driveway. I could hear the faint sound of music and laughter floating over the high hedges. They were celebrating a victory purchased with my stolen future. I parked my car, checked my phone to ensure my voice recording application was active and running in the background, and stepped out. It was time to join the party and let the fallout begin. I stepped onto the immaculate cobblestone driveway, leaving my modest sedan parked between a gleaming sports car and a brand new luxury sport utility vehicle. The heavy iron gates of the estate were swung wide open, welcoming a steady stream of elite guests. A valet in a crisp white shirt offered to take my keys, but I politely declined, preferring the guarantee of a quick exit. The sheer scale of the property was staggering. It featured a sprawling stone facade, perfectly manicured topiary gardens, and massive arched windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Every brick, every blade of grass, and every drop of champagne flowing inside was theoretically paid for by my decade of 80-hour work weeks and delayed gratification. As I walked through the massive double doors, the scent of expensive catered food and fresh lilies hit me. The foyer alone was larger than my entire Chicago apartment. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand living room, completely ignored by the dozens of guests laughing and clinking crystal flutes. Servers in black uniforms glided through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with caviar and rare cheeses. It was a masterclass in performative wealth. My parents had pulled out all the stops to ensure the debut of Bradley and Nia into upper-class society was flawless. I moved silently through the crowd, my phone safely tucked in my blazer pocket, with the recording application capturing every sound. I spotted my father Howard first. He stood near a massive marble fireplace holding a glass of scotch and gesturing expansively to a group of men wearing tailored suits. I drifted closer, hiding behind a towering floral arrangement to listen. Howard was boasting loudly about his son and his incredible business acumen. He claimed Bradley had just closed a monumental deal, securing massive overseas investment that allowed him to purchase this estate in cash. My father laughed, clapping another man on the shoulder, completely intoxicated by the social validation he was receiving. He looked so proud, so entirely detached from the reality that he had robbed his own daughter to fund this magnificent illusion. A few yards away, my mother Brenda was holding court with a group of country club wives. She wore a designer silk dress that looked brand new. She was pointing out the architectural details of the house, taking personal credit for helping Nia select the imported Italian marble for the kitchen counters. Brenda sighed dramatically, telling the women how exhausting it was to manage such massive family wealth, but how rewarding it felt to see her children thrive. I watched her face, searching for any trace of guilt or hesitation. There was none. She was radiant, energized by the theft, completely comfortable sacrificing me on the altar of her social ambition. I continued my slow progression toward the back patio where the loudest laughter was originating. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors, I saw my brother Bradley. He was leaning against an outdoor bar holding court with several younger men who looked like aggressive venture capitalists. Bradley wore a tailored linen suit and a custom watch that gleamed in the bright sunlight. He was spinning a ridiculous narrative about his startup company, throwing around buzzwords like market disruption and scalable synergy. It was the exact same script he had used for every failed business he had ever launched. Only this time, he had a multi-million-dollar backdrop to make the lie look incredibly real. Beside him stood Nia, the ultimate architect of this entire deception. She looked absolutely triumphant. She wore a tailored white dress that perfectly complemented her sharp features, holding a glass of vintage champagne. Nia was speaking with an arrogant confidence, accepting compliments on her new home, as if she had earned every square foot of it through honest corporate labor. I watched as she casually instructed a catering server to fetch her a fresh drink, treating the staff with a dismissive wave of her hand. She was playing the role of the wealthy matriarch to absolute perfection. Knowing what I knew about her pending federal tax lien and her embezzlement history, her performance was almost comical. She was standing on the edge of a federal prison sentence, drinking imported champagne and pretending she owned the entire world. I stood at the threshold between the living room and the patio, calculating the sheer cost of this single afternoon. The string quartet, the premium catering, the floral arrangements, the valet service. This party alone must have cost upwards of $30,000. They were spending money they did not actually have, relying entirely on the assumption that my $700,000 would clear the bank holding account by Monday morning. They were literally writing checks against a frozen account, digging their financial and legal graves deeper with every passing hour. I took a slow breath, grounding myself completely. The rage that had threatened to consume me earlier that morning was completely gone, replaced by a cold and clinical precision. I was no longer looking at my family. I was looking at a group of hostile actors who had executed a coordinated cyber attack against my life. My role now was simply to gather the final pieces of audio evidence required by the authorities and deliver the precise amount of psychological pressure needed to make them panic. I checked my phone screen one last time, ensuring the red recording dot was blinking steadily. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out onto the sunlit patio. For a few seconds, I remained unnoticed in the sea of guests. I walked directly toward the outdoor bar, placing myself right in the center of their perfect tableau. My dark business blazer stood out sharply against the pastel resort wear of the other attendees. The first person to notice me was Bradley. He was mid-sentence boasting about his supposed venture capital funding when his eyes locked onto mine. His mouth stopped moving instantly. The arrogant grin vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden flash of profound confusion. He blinked repeatedly, clearly struggling to process why the sister he had just robbed was standing in his backyard, looking utterly composed. Nia noticed her husband falter and followed his line of sight. Her reaction was entirely different from Bradley's. The champagne flute in her hand remained perfectly steady, but her posture instantly shifted into a defensive corporate stance. She stepped forward smoothly, placing herself between me and the group of wealthy investors Bradley had been entertaining. "Hello, Gwen," Nia said, her voice projecting a sickeningly sweet tone designed to carry across the patio. "We were not sure you would be up for socializing today. You have been under so much pressure at work lately." The music seemed to dip, or perhaps the guests simply sensed the sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure. Heads turned in our direction. I did not break eye contact with my sister-in-law. "I am feeling remarkably clear-headed, Nia," I replied, my voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the surrounding guests could hear every syllable. In fact, I just came from a very enlightening meeting with Mr. Caldwell at the bank. We were reviewing some fascinating digital signatures originating from this exact address. Bradley physically flinched, taking a step backward until his shoulder hit the stone edge of the outdoor bar. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Nia, however, was a professional manipulator. She smiled, a look of deep manufactured pity crossing her sharp features. She turned slightly so the investors could see her perform the role of the caring relative. "Gwen, sweetheart," Nia said, using the patronizing tone she likely employed when terminating employees at her logistics firm. "We know you are upset, but this is exactly what the doctors warned us about. Your paranoia is acting up again. Howard and Brenda had to step in legally because you were making reckless financial decisions. We are only trying to protect your assets until you are well enough to manage them yourself." It was a masterclass in psychological abuse. She was publicly framing my legitimate outrage over a massive financial theft as a symptom of a mental breakdown. She was setting the narrative for all the wealthy bystanders, painting herself and my brother as the benevolent caretakers of a deeply troubled woman. Before I could respond, my mother Brenda pushed her way through the crowd. She had practically sprinted from the living room the moment she realized I was on the patio. She grabbed my arm, her manicured fingers digging painfully into my skin. "Gwen, please," Brenda pleaded, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical precision. "Do not do this here. Do not make a scene in front of Bradley's friends. We love you so much, and it breaks my heart to see you like this." Brenda let out a practiced sob, bringing her free hand up to cover her mouth. Several of the country club wives who had followed her out murmured in sympathy. My mother was actually crying fake tears over my supposed mental illness while wearing a designer dress funded by my stolen retirement savings. I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. "Take your hand off me, Brenda," I said, keeping my tone completely devoid of emotion. My father Howard arrived next, stepping forcefully into the circle. He used his physical bulk to try and intimidate me, standing far too close and lowering his voice to an aggressive hiss. "You are going to turn around, get in your car, and drive back to the city." Howard ordered, his face flushed with anger. "Family business is kept private. We secured the power of attorney because you are completely unstable. If you push this, I will have you committed for a psychiatric hold. Do you understand me? You are ruining your brother's big day." I looked at the four of them. My father threatening me with forced hospitalization. My mother weeping crocodile tears for an audience. My brother cowering behind his wife. And Nia standing tall and arrogant, believing she had legally outsmarted a system she only half understood. They were completely united in their delusion, convinced that their coordinated gaslighting could rewrite reality and force me into submission. "I am not unstable," I said, raising my voice just enough to silence the whispers of the crowd around us. "I am the sole owner of a $700,000 trust fund that was fraudulently accessed at 3 this morning. You used a forged electronic signature and a stolen verification code to route my money to a title escrow company and a federal tax lien portal." The gasp that rippled through the crowd was genuine. The venture capitalist standing near Bradley suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable. One of them actually set his drink down and took a discreet step away from the bar. Nia's eyes flashed with genuine panic for a fraction of a second. She had not expected me to announce the specifics of the routing numbers to an audience of financial professionals. She took a step closer to me, abandoning the sweet sister-in-law act. "You are deeply unwell," Nia stated loudly, her voice hard and authoritative. "Howard has medical power of attorney. We have the legal right to secure your funds for your own care. Now leave my property before I call security to have you escorted out for trespassing." "It is fascinating that you call it your property, Nia," I replied, offering her a cold, calculated smile, especially considering the wire transfer funding this estate has not actually cleared the bank holding vault yet. I wonder how the title company will feel when they realize the down payment is tied to a federal fraud investigation. Bradley made a choked sound, looking frantically at his wife. "Nia, what does she mean it has not cleared? You said the money was in the account. You said it was done. Shut up, Bradley!" Nia hissed, her composure finally beginning to crack under the pressure. I looked at my mother, whose fake tears had instantly dried up the moment I mentioned the funds were not completely cleared. Her face was chalk white. She looked from me to Howard, sheer terror replacing her theatrical performance. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had delivered exactly the amount of psychological pressure required to make them panic. I had planted the seed of doubt right in the middle of their lavish celebration. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against my phone to ensure the recording application was still capturing every single damning word they spoke. "Enjoy your party," I said, looking directly at Nia and my parents. "Enjoy the champagne and the caviar. Enjoy the illusion of wealth while you still can. Because come Monday morning, the reality of what you have done is going to catch up with you." I turned my back on them and walked away. I did not run. I walked slowly and deliberately through the parted crowd of guests, ignoring the stares and the hushed murmurs. I walked back through the massive double doors, through the grand foyer, and out into the crisp afternoon air. My heart was beating steadily. I had the audio recording of their admission. I had the threats of forced hospitalization. I had everything I needed to hand directly to the federal authorities. The trap was perfectly set, and they were already tearing themselves apart inside it. I walked down the immaculate cobblestone driveway, my sensible black flats clicking rhythmically against the stone. The valet who had offered to park my car earlier stood frozen clearly, having overheard the echoes of the confrontation from the patio. I gave him a curt nod, unlocked my sedan, and slid into the driver's seat. The moment the car doors locked, I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket and stopped the voice recording. I saved the audio file under a secure encrypted folder synced directly to my cloud storage. I plugged my phone into the car stereo and played the last 5 minutes back. The audio quality was pristine. Howard's aggressive threats to commit me to a psychiatric facility came through loud and clear. Brenda's manufactured sobbing sounded exactly as fake on the recording as it did in person. But the most valuable piece of evidence was Nia's loud, arrogant declaration that they had legal rights to secure my funds. She had openly admitted to the transfer in front of dozens of witnesses. They had thought they were executing a flawless corporate maneuver. They believed that by relying on the sheer audacity of their lie, they could steamroll me into silence. My parents had spent my entire life doing exactly that. Whenever Bradley failed, they simply rewrote the narrative and demanded I play along to protect the family image. But this was not a bad report card or a crashed leased vehicle. This was wire fraud. I started the engine pulling away from the curb just as I saw Bradley burst out of the front doors of the mansion. He was frantically scrolling on his phone, his face red and sweating. He looked up, spotting my car as I drove past the iron gates. He took 2 steps down the driveway, waving his arms as if demanding I stop and explain myself. I didn't even tap the brakes. My mind was already moving to the next phase of the operation. The confrontation had served its purpose. I had disrupted their sense of security and forced them to verbally acknowledge the theft on a digital recording. But more importantly, I had cemented their desperation. By informing Nia that the funds had not yet cleared, I knew exactly how she would react. She would not back down. A corporate narcissist like Nia, especially, one facing down an IRS tax lien, would double down. She would try to force the transaction through by any means necessary. I drove back toward the city, pulling up the contact information for the private investigator Cole. I needed him to expedite the background checks and compile the final dossier. I needed every piece of paper documenting Nia's embezzlement and the exact timeline of the IRS actions against her. The federal authorities would need a neat, thoroughly researched package handed to them on a silver platter. As the Chicago skyline came into view, my phone began to buzz incessantly in the passenger seat. The family group chat was exploding again. The barrage of incoming texts confirmed that my psychological strike had hit the mark perfectly. They were no longer celebrating. They were panicking, and in their panic, they were about to make the fatal mistake that would send them all to prison. My phone vibrated violently against the center console. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I tapped the green icon on the dashboard display, routing the audio through the car speakers, while my screen recording application silently captured his voice. I did not say hello. I just let the ambient noise of the highway fill the silence. "Gwen, turn your car around right now," Howard ordered. His voice was no longer the manufactured tone of a concerned parent. It was a guttural, frantic bark of a man whose financial house of cards was collapsing. "You are going to drive back to this estate, and you are going to get on the phone with your bank manager. You will authorize the release of those funds immediately." I kept my eyes on the road merging into the express lane. I let him keep talking. "If you do not fix this today," Howard threatened, his breathing heavy through the microphone, "I will make sure you lose everything. I know board members at your financial technology firm. I will call your chief executive officer tomorrow morning and inform them that their senior designer is suffering from paranoid delusions and is legally unfit to handle secure systems. I will have you committed. I will have you stripped of your career. You will authorize the bank to clear that anti-money laundering hold by 5 this afternoon, or you will no longer have a family. Do you hear me? You will be nothing. He was giving me an ultimatum. Relinquish my entire life savings to save my brother and his corrupt wife, or face complete destruction. He fully intended to leverage his country club connections to destroy my professional reputation. He was willing to ruin my career, my livelihood, and my sanity, all to protect Nia from the federal consequences of her own embezzlement. "Are you listening to me?" Howard yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "We are your blood. You owe us this. If you walk away now, you are dead to us." That was the moment, the exact millisecond where the last remaining thread of my biological attachment severed completely. There was no grand epiphany accompanied by tears. There was no tragic weeping over the steering wheel. There was only the silent, absolute realization that the people who raised me were hostile adversaries. They were not my parents anymore. They were simply desperate criminals trying to extort a witness. I reached out and tapped the red icon on the screen. The call ended. I did not utter a single word in response. I denied him the satisfaction of an argument. I denied him the power of my fear. The silence in the car was profound and beautiful. I did not shed a tear. I felt entirely hollowed out, but the emptiness was not a void. It was a perfectly clean slate. The silent pivot had occurred. I was no longer a betrayed daughter seeking justice. I was a digital security expert executing a threat neutralization protocol. To neutralize them completely, I needed a federal trap. State-level fraud could be pleaded down. A skilled defense attorney could argue that the forged power of attorney was a family miscommunication, a messy civil dispute over shared assets. My father would use his wealth to drag it out for years, exhausting my resources and forcing a settlement. I could not allow that to happen. I needed charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences in a federal penitentiary. I began mentally mapping the federal statutes. Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1343 covers wire fraud. It requires a scheme to defraud and the use of interstate wire communications to execute that scheme. Title 18, Section 10(28) A covers aggravated identity theft, which adds a mandatory consecutive 2-year sentence when someone knowingly uses another person's identification during a felony. For the trap to snap shut with inescapable force, the stolen funds had to officially settle into their target destinations. As long as the $700,000 sat in the bank's internal holding vault, flagged by the anti-money laundering system, the crime was incomplete. It was merely attempted fraud. But the moment the automated clearinghouse network pushed that money across state lines, the moment the Federal Reserve logged the transaction into the Internal Revenue Service portal to clear Nia's tax lien, the federal crime was fully realized. I needed them to push the button. I needed them to actively, aggressively demand the release of those funds, using the stolen credentials. The ultimatum my father just delivered was exactly what I needed. They were so blinded by their arrogance and their desperate need to close the real estate deal that they would stop at nothing to force the transaction through. They would double down on the fake power of attorney. They would likely attempt to submit further fraudulent documentation to the bank to prove my supposed mental incompetence. Every fake document they submitted, every lie they told to the banking officials would stack another federal charge onto their indictment. I exited the highway and navigated toward the downtown business district. I was not going home to my apartment. I was heading to my corporate office. The building was mostly empty on a Saturday afternoon, which provided the perfect secure environment. I swiped my access badge, rode the elevator to the secure floor, and walked into my private workspace. I booted up my encrypted workstation and immediately began compiling the digital forensics dossier. I organized the audio recording from the patio confrontation, the recording of my father's threatening phone call, the server logs showing the time and location of the text message intercept, and the metadata from the forged power of attorney. I created a pristine, chronologically ordered timeline of their entire cyber attack. I was building a prosecution package so devastatingly clear that a federal prosecutor would not even have to think twice before issuing arrest warrants. I opened my secure messaging application and contacted Cole. I instructed him to gather every piece of public record regarding Bradley's failed corporate filings and Nia's impending federal tax crisis. We needed to establish the undeniable financial motive for the theft. The picture we were painting was flawless. Two desperate debt-ridden frauds using their enabler parents to rob a secure tech professional. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and watched the data compile on my dual monitors. I had given them every opportunity to be a family. Now I was going to let them be felons. I left my corporate office late that Saturday evening and drove directly to a nondescript brick building in the West Loop. Cole operated his private investigation firm out of a converted warehouse space that looked more like a cybersecurity bunker than a traditional detective agency. I had retained his services for corporate audits before, but this time I was hiring him to dismantle my own bloodline. When I walked through the heavy steel door, Cole was already waiting at a massive glass conference table. Multiple glowing monitors illuminated his face in the dim room. I set my encrypted hard drive on the glass surface. This contains the initial metadata and audio recordings I told him. I need you to completely eviscerate my brother's financial history. I want every shell company, every failed venture, and every hidden debt exposed. Cole nodded, plugging the drive into an isolated terminal. He did not ask unnecessary questions. That was why I trusted him. He understood that data told the only truth that mattered in a courtroom. We started with Bradley. For years, my parents had paraded my brother around their country club as a visionary entrepreneur. They funded his lifestyle, leased his luxury cars, and covered his massive credit card bills to maintain the illusion of his success. But as Cole began pulling state business registry filings and corporate tax records, the illusion evaporated instantly. Bradley had registered 7 different limited liability companies over the past 10 years. Every single one of them was a hollow shell. There was a boutique fitness app that never launched. There was a premium coffee import business with zero inventory. There was a digital marketing agency that had exactly one client, which turned out to be a fake entity created by my father to funnel money to Bradley under the guise of legitimate revenue. As we dug deeper into the digital paper trail, the level of financial incompetence became staggering. Bradley had not generated a single dollar of actual profit in a decade. Instead, he lived entirely on a cycle of taking out high-interest business loans, draining the capital for personal expenses, and then quietly filing for corporate bankruptcy when the creditors came knocking. My parents had bailed him out of 3 separate civil lawsuits to prevent public judgments from ruining his reputation. They had liquidated their own retirement assets to cover his tracks. But the most recent venture was different. The real estate holding company Bradley claimed to be running now was entirely funded by phantom capital. Cole pulled up the bank routing histories tied to Bradley's current business accounts. The ledgers were a mess of incredibly suspicious transfers. Small deposits coming in from unverified offshore payment processors, immediately followed by large cash withdrawals. It looked exactly like amateur money laundering. Bradley was out of his depth. He had burned through my parents' available cash, and he had clearly gotten involved with creditors who did not accept corporate bankruptcy as a valid excuse for non-payment. He was desperate. But Bradley was not smart enough to orchestrate the sophisticated digital heist that had frozen my $700,000 trust fund. He did not have the technical knowledge to bypass 2-factor authentication or forge a digital power of attorney that could pass a banking compliance check. That required someone with systemic access and a ruthless understanding of corporate finance. That required Nia. Cole shifted his attention to the second monitor, opening a secure portal connected to federal public records. "We need to follow the money flowing between your brother and your sister-in-law." Cole said, his fingers moving rapidly over the keyboard. "If Bradley is the sinking ship, Nia is the anchor dragging him to the bottom." We began tracing the digital paper trail connecting their joint accounts. For the first 2 years of their marriage, the financial flow was entirely one-sided. Nia, holding a lucrative executive position in human resources, was the primary breadwinner. Her salary kept the luxury cars in the driveway and the designer clothes in their closets. But 12 months ago, the pattern shifted violently. Large, unexplained deposits began hitting their joint checking account. These deposits were consistently routed through a third-party payroll processor that Cole quickly identified as a subsidiary of the logistics firm where Nia worked. She was creating ghost employees, I realized, staring at the screen in absolute horror and fascination. She was using her human resources clearance to add fake profiles to the company payroll, routing the salaries directly into their personal accounts. Cole confirmed the theory by pulling a cross-reference on the routing numbers. Exactly. And she was using those stolen corporate funds to prop up Bradley's failing real estate venture. They were using embezzled money to fabricate a legitimate income stream. But the digital paper trail did not stop there. The phantom payroll scheme had apparently triggered an internal audit at Nia's company. We found traces of a sudden massive withdrawal from their joint account exactly 3 months ago. A desperate attempt to return some of the stolen funds before the auditors noticed the discrepancy. It was not enough. The Internal Revenue Service had caught wind of the mismatched payroll taxes. A federal tax lien does not happen overnight. It is the result of a lengthy investigation. Nia had been fighting a losing battle against federal auditors for months entirely in secret. The pressure must have been unimaginable. She was facing the total destruction of her corporate career, public disgrace, and a lengthy stay in a federal penitentiary. The $450,000 wire transfer scheduled to hit the federal tax portal was not an investment. It was restitution. She was trying to pay back the embezzled funds and the resulting tax penalties in one lump sum, hoping to secure a plea deal or avoid federal prosecution altogether. And because my parents had already bankrupted themselves, keeping Bradley afloat for a decade, my trust fund was the only remaining source of liquid capital large enough to save her. I sat back, the blue light of the monitors reflecting off the glass table. The puzzle was completely solved. My family had not stolen my money out of simple greed. They had stolen it out of sheer unadulterated panic. They were cornered animals lashing out at the easiest target to survive. They viewed my carefully protected financial security as a communal life raft, and they were perfectly willing to drown me to keep themselves above water. Print everything, I told Cole. Every corporate filing, every routing discrepancy, every public record of the tax lien. We are building a prosecution package. I want a physical dossier so dense and undeniable that a federal agent will not even have to lift a finger to conduct their own investigation. This was no longer just about recovering my money. This was about completely dismantling the false reality my family had constructed at my expense. Cole hit the print command, and the heavy laser printer in the corner of the room began humming to life, churning out page after page of indisputable evidence against them. You have the motive and the mechanism, Cole said quietly, stacking the warm papers into a neat pile. Now you just need them to finalize the transaction. I nodded, pulling my phone from my pocket to check my messages one last time. The trap was perfectly constructed and ready. Now I just needed to hand them the rope. Read the executive summary first, Cole said, tapping a heavy finger on the top page. It is not just a standard corporate audit. It is a final notice of intent to levy from the federal government. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. The documents detailed an active and aggressive investigation by the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The target was my sister-in-law, Naya. As I read through the specific mechanics of her embezzlement, the sheer scale and profound cruelty of her crimes came into razor-sharp focus. Nia had weaponized her corporate authority in the most depraved way imaginable. She did not just create phantom employee profiles to funnel a few $1,000s into her joint checking account. She actively targeted the financial lifelines of the most vulnerable people in her logistics firm. As the human resources director, Nia had unilateral access to severance packages, disability payouts, and life insurance disbursements for deceased staff members. When an employee passed away or suffered a catastrophic injury, Nia used her administrative security clearance to intercept the financial payout. She would route the funds through a complex web of offshore holding accounts, scrape the majority of the capital into Bradley's failing real estate shell companies, and then issue a tiny fraction of the original amount to the grieving families. If anyone questioned the discrepancies, she used her corporate authority to gaslight them, blaming bureaucratic tax errors and complicated corporate policies for the reduced sums. She was a predator operating behind the safety of a corporate title. This explained her flawless ability to manipulate my parents and look me dead in the eye while trying to commit me to a psychiatric facility. She viewed human beings entirely as disposable assets to be liquidated for her own comfort. I was just another asset on her balance sheet. Look at the federal tax penalty, Cole instructed, pointing to a highlighted column on the third page. I followed his finger. The federal government had uncovered the phantom payroll scheme 8 months ago. They did not immediately arrest her, because they were building a massive racketeering case. The IRS did not just want the stolen corporate funds returned, they wanted the unpaid taxes on her illegal income along with exorbitant federal penalties. The exact figure demanded by the Department of the Treasury to prevent immediate pretrial detention and the total seizure of all her physical assets was precisely $450,000. The wire transfer hitting the federal tax portal from my account was not an investment, it was a secret plea deal. Naya had negotiated a partial restitution agreement with federal prosecutors to stay out of a penitentiary. The deadline for that payment was Monday morning. That explained the frantic, sloppy nature of the Friday night digital heist. They were entirely out of time. But what about the house? I asked, flipping to the real estate escrow documents. Why are they wiring $250,000 to a title company to close on a luxury mansion when they are facing federal indictment? It makes no logical sense to buy property when the government is actively hunting your assets. Cole smiled grimly. It makes perfect sense if you understand the state homestead exemption laws. They are attempting a highly sophisticated asset protection strategy. If Nia and Bradley use the remaining stolen funds to close on that Oak Brook estate and establish it as their primary residence before the federal indictment is officially unsealed, they can shield a massive portion of the home equity from government seizure. They are trying to bury the stolen money in brick and mortar so the IRS cannot touch it. The absolute audacity of the plan left me momentarily speechless. They were using my clean, legally earned money to execute a dirty survival strategy. But as I stared at the routing numbers bridging my frozen trust fund to the IRS portal, a terrifying realization washed over me. Cole, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. If I had simply let this transfer go through without securing the metadata and notifying my bank manager, what would the federal investigators see when they traced the funds? Cole stopped typing and looked at me, his expression entirely serious. They would see a clean $700,000 injection of capital originating from a secure trust fund owned by a senior financial technology designer. They would look at your expertise in digital banking interfaces. They would see your brother funneling dirty money into shell companies, and they would see your clean money paying off his debts. They would think I was the financial mastermind, I concluded, feeling a cold sweat break out along my spine. They would think I was laundering the money for them. Yes, Cole confirmed bluntly. If you had not documented the text message intercept and flagged the forged power of attorney. With Caldwell this morning, the FBI would eventually knock on your door. Nia was not just stealing your retirement savings. She was using your financial accounts to build a firewall between herself and a federal indictment. If the government followed the money, you would be listed as an unindicted co-conspirator. My own parents were willing to let me take the fall for a federal money laundering ring. Howard and Brenda knew exactly how deep Bradley and Nia were buried in criminal debt. They chose to sacrifice my freedom to preserve their golden child. The fake mental health crisis, the gaslighting at the housewarming party, the threats to have me involuntarily committed, all of it was designed to discredit me. If I tried to report the theft later, my parents would point to my supposed psychiatric breakdown to invalidate my claims, leaving me entirely defenseless against federal prosecutors. I stood up from the glass conference table, my hands balled into tight fists. The sheer scale of their malice required a response of equal devastation. I was no longer interested in simply recovering my funds. I was going to ensure that every single one of them faced the absolute maximum penalty under federal law. Print 2 copies of this entire dossier, I told Cole, picking up my encrypted hard drive. Put every piece of evidence, every routing number, and every fake corporate filing into a secure binder. Where are you going? Cole asked, already hitting the print command. I am going to make a phone call, I said, walking toward the heavy steel door of his office. I know exactly who handles these specific types of financial cybercrimes. It is time to introduce my family to Special Agent Dominic. It is time to introduce my family to Special Agent Dominic. I stepped out of the converted warehouse and into the biting chill of the Chicago night. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, sealing away the hum of the servers, but the data Cole had uncovered continued to scream in my head. I walked to my sedan, tossed the thick dossier onto the passenger seat, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. For the first time all day, I allowed the vehicle to remain in park while I confronted the darkest, most irredeemable truth of this entire operation. My parents knew everything. Howard and Brenda were not innocent bystanders, swept up in a desperate scheme orchestrated by a rogue daughter-in-law. They were not naive suburbanites manipulated by Nia and her corporate jargon. They were active, willing co-conspirators. They had looked at the impending destruction of their golden child and made a calculated, cold-blooded decision to throw their only daughter directly into a federal fire. As I sat in the quiet isolation of my car, I began running a mental diagnostic on the past 6 months of my family interactions. The scattered, seemingly harmless anomalies now formed a terrifyingly clear pattern. I realized that my father had initiated a hostile reconnaissance mission against my finances nearly 12 weeks ago. He had invited me to a rare one-on-one lunch at his country club. Between courses, Howard had casually steered the conversation toward the tech industry, pressing me for specific details about my stock options and liquidity. He framed it as paternal pride offering to connect me with a high-tier wealth management firm. I had politely declined, preferring to keep my assets siloed. I see now that he was not offering financial advice. He was appraising me. He was determining if my net worth was substantial enough to cover the massive federal tax penalty Nia was secretly facing. He needed to know if the target was worth the breach. Then there was my mother. Brenda had spent the last 2 months systematically poisoning the well. I recalled a recent family gathering where she cornered my aunts and whispered about my supposed erratic behavior. She planted seeds of concern, suggesting that the intense pressure of the software design industry was severely impacting my cognitive health. She told them I was isolating myself, acting paranoid, and suffering from extreme burnout. I had dismissed it at the time as Brenda needing fresh material for her dramatic gossip. It was not gossip. It was a calculated psychological assassination. She was establishing a documented history of mental instability within our social circle. When the time came to drain my trust fund using a forged medical incapacitation clause, my parents needed the extended family to nod in sympathetic agreement rather than question the sudden transfer of wealth. The sheer scale of their malice took my breath away. They were building a firewall to protect Naya, and I was the primary building material. Nia was staring down the barrel of a multi-million-dollar embezzlement case and an aggressive Internal Revenue Service investigation. If she went to a federal penitentiary, Bradley would be publicly humiliated. The pristine, highly curated social facade my parents had spent decades constructing would shatter overnight. The country club elite would whisper about the bankrupt son and the felon wife. In the twisted, toxic hierarchy of the Howard and Brenda household, public disgrace was a fate worse than death. To prevent that disgrace, they weighed my entire existence against Bradley and his reputation. They looked at the $700,000 I had secured through years of grueling 80-hour work weeks. They looked at the clean, untainted financial record I had meticulously maintained. And they decided I was completely expendable. My father was a seasoned businessman. He understood exactly how federal tax liens operated. He knew that by pushing dirty money through my unflagged high net worth account, they were effectively turning me into a money laundering conduit. They knew the federal government was tracing Nia and her stolen corporate funds. By using my credentials to execute the final payoff, they were deliberately painting a target on my back. If the authorities came knocking with a federal indictment, Howard and Brenda intended for me to open the door. They wanted me to take the fall. They planned to use my fabricated mental breakdown as the ultimate scapegoat defense, leaving me locked in a psychiatric ward or a federal prison while Bradley and Nia enjoyed their luxury mansion in Oakbrook. I stared at the dashboard display, processing the absolute absence of parental love. There is a specific kind of freedom that comes from realizing your family views you as nothing more than a disposable asset. It strips away all obligation. It eradicates any lingering guilt. I no longer had a mother or a father. I had hostile adversaries who had launched a devastating cyber attack against my livelihood. I refused to be the collateral damage in their desperate bid for social survival. I would not allow them to sip champagne while my future burned to the ground. In the world of digital security, you do not negotiate with hostile adversaries. You neutralize them. I reached over and rested my hand on the dossier Cole had prepared. The paper was still warm from the printer. It contained the complete digital forensics package, detailing the unauthorized access, the forged signatures, the routing numbers, and the undeniable evidence of Nia and her pending tax disaster. It was a perfectly wrapped gift for the federal authorities. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the industrial parking lot, merging onto the brightly lit expressway, heading toward the city center. I needed to execute the next phase of the protocol immediately. The bank anti-money laundering hold was a ticking clock. I had to establish a controlled delivery operation before the system automatically released or rejected the funds. I picked up my phone and opened my encrypted contact list. During my tenure designing secure financial pathways, I had collaborated with several high-level cybersecurity task forces. You do not build banking interfaces without occasionally interacting with the people who hunt down the criminals trying to break them. I scrolled past the corporate contacts and found the specific number I needed. I tapped the screen and initiated the call. I was about to turn my family and their desperate financial heist into a fully monitored federal sting operation. The phone rang twice before a sharp professional voice answered the line. "Dominic," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the road ahead. "I need an emergency meeting. I have a live wire fraud and aggravated identity theft case currently paused in a bank holding vault. The targets are attempting to launder $700,000 to clear a federal tax lien, and they are using my stolen credentials to do it." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Where are you right now?" the agent asked. "I am 10 minutes away from the field office," I replied. "I have the entire forensic timeline mapped and printed. Tell your team to clear a conference room. We have a trap to set." I pulled into the visitor parking lot of the federal building exactly 9 minutes later. The imposing brutalist architecture of the field office matched the cold mechanical precision vibrating in my chest. I grabbed the heavy dossier from the passenger seat, locked my vehicle, and strode through the reinforced glass doors. Security was tight, but Dominic was already waiting for me past the metal detectors. Special Agent Dominic was a tall, sharply dressed man in his late 40s, operating as a lead investigator for the Cyber Financial Crimes Division. We had crossed paths 2 years ago during a joint task force seminar on banking encryption vulnerabilities. He knew my work, and he knew I did not exaggerate. He gave me a brief professional nod and swiped his federal access badge to let me through the secondary security checkpoint. We took the elevator in silence to the 5th floor. Dominic led me down a sterile hallway and into a windowless conference room equipped with dual monitors and a secure internal network terminal. Another agent was already waiting at the table, a forensic accountant introduced as Agent Foster. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I dropped the thick, warm dossier onto the center of the metal table and slid it toward them. At 3 this morning, an unauthorized party bypassed a two-factor authentication protocol on my primary trust account. I began keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. They used a forged digital power of attorney, citing a fabricated medical incapacitation clause to gain full signatory control. They initiated a wire transfer of $700,000 out of my portfolio. Dominic opened the dossier, his eyes scanning the executive summary Cole had prepared. "Who is the target?" "My sister-in-law, Nia," I replied, taking the seat across from them. "She is a corporate human resources director for a major logistics firm. She orchestrated the breach alongside my brother Bradley. My parents Howard and Brenda acted as the physical accomplices and social engineers. They manufactured a distraction during a family dinner to gain physical access to my mobile device and intercept the banking security code." Agent Foster pulled a notepad forward. "And the funds? Are they gone?" I shook my head. "No, I designed the security architecture on that specific account myself. Any outbound wire exceeding $100,000 to an unrecognized routing number Triggers an automatic 72-hour anti-money laundering suspension. The bank manager, Mr. Caldwell, placed the funds in a secure holding vault. However, the user portal that my sister-in-law is monitoring currently displays the transfer status as processing. Dominic flipped to the second section of the dossier, pausing at the detailed routing schematics. He traced his finger along the printed lines of code. This is remarkably detailed, Gwen. Where is this money trying to go? It is split into two streams, I explained, pointing to the highlighted routing numbers on the page. $250,000 is directed to a title escrow company in Oakbrook for a luxury real estate purchase. The remaining $450,000 is routed directly to the Department of the Treasury. Foster stopped writing and looked up, his brow deeply furrowed. The Treasury. Why would identity thieves wire stolen funds to the federal government? Because Nia is attempting to avoid standing exactly where I am standing right now, I stated bluntly. Turn to page 14 of the dossier. Dominic turned the pages, and I watched his posture shift from analytical interest to predatory focus. The document he was looking at was the federal notice of intent to levy. Nia has been embezzling from her corporate employer for over a year. I continued laying out the narrative with surgical precision. She exploited her human resources clearance to intercept life insurance and disability payouts intended for deceased or critically injured employees. She funneled the capital into my brother's empty shell companies to fabricate a legitimate income stream. The Internal Revenue Service caught the discrepancies. They are currently building a massive racketeering case against her. That wire transfer to the Treasury portal is a desperate attempt to pay off her stolen taxes and penalties to negotiate a plea deal before an indictment is unsealed. Dominic let out a low whistle, passing the tax document to Foster. And the real estate purchase? Asset shielding, I replied instantly. Illinois homestead exemption laws. They are trying to close on a multi-million-dollar property and establish it as their primary residence before the federal freeze hits. They want to bury my stolen money in a hard asset to protect it from government seizure. My parents are fully aware of this. They actively helped coordinate the theft of my life savings because they would rather bankrupt me than watch their golden son and his wife go to a federal penitentiary. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system overhead. Dominic and Foster exchanged a significant look. As federal agents, they spent their days chasing digital ghosts, trying to reconstruct financial crimes from scattered, deleted data. I had just handed them a perfectly preserved, fully documented, multi-jurisdictional felony case wrapped in a neat bow. You have the motive, the mechanism, and the exact routing pathways, Dominic said, tapping his pen against the table. If they successfully push this transfer through, they are looking at aggravated identity theft under Title 18, Section 1028A, and federal wire fraud under Section 1343. The minimum mandatory sentencing would be severe, especially considering they are using stolen funds to pay off an existing federal tax penalty. That is essentially defrauding the government twice in one transaction. Exactly, I agreed. But right now, because the funds are caught in the anti-money laundering hold, they have only committed attempted fraud. My parents have already laid the groundwork to claim I am mentally unstable. If I simply cancel the transfer, they will hire high-powered defense attorneys, claim it was a misunderstanding caused by my supposed paranoia, and completely evade federal prosecution. I refuse to let them escape. I leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the metal table, ensuring Dominic heard the absolute resolve in my voice. I need them to commit to the crime officially. My father just called me an hour ago and threatened to destroy my career and have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility if I do not authorize the bank to release the funds. They are desperate. They are completely out of time with the Internal Revenue Service. If I tell the bank to release the anti-money laundering hold, Nia and Bradley will immediately finalize the wire transfer. Agent Foster looked at Dominic. She is suggesting a controlled delivery. I nodded. I want you to monitor the transaction from the inside. I want the bank to attach a federal tracking tag to every single dollar. I want to release the funds, let them sign the closing documents on that mansion, and let them submit the stolen money to the federal tax portal. The moment that money settles, the crime is complete. I want you to arrest them at their own victory party. Dominic studied me for a long moment, evaluating the sheer weight of what I was proposing. In federal law enforcement, a controlled delivery is typically used for narcotics or illegal weapons. Applying it to a massive digital wire fraud initiated by a family member was highly unconventional, but entirely legal if coordinated correctly with the bank and the victim. "You understand the risks here," Gwen Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave. "Once we release those funds, they enter the federal clearing system. We can freeze them on the receiving end, but you are intentionally putting $700,000 of your own liquid capital into play. If there is a blind spot in their routing architecture that we miss retrieving, the money could take months of bureaucratic litigation." "I know exactly how my money is routed," I stated without hesitation. "I built the security walls they are trying to climb over. I am willing to take the risk to ensure they never have the opportunity to victimize anyone else again." Dominic looked down at the perfectly organized dossier, then back up at me. He closed the folder and slid it toward his keyboard. "Let me pull the United States Attorney on duty," Dominic said, reaching for his desk phone. "We are going to need to draft an immediate cooperation agreement between you, your bank, and our cyber division." Agent Foster began pulling up the federal statutes on his monitor, preparing to draft the preliminary request for a monitoring warrant. The speed at which they were mobilizing confirmed what I already knew. The sheer brazenness of Nia using stolen money to pay a federal tax lien was an insult to the Treasury Department. The federal government does not take kindly to being treated as a money laundering service. I sat back in my chair and watched the two agents work. The betrayal by my family had attempted to strip me of my agency to render me helpless and compliant. Instead, it had armed me with the most powerful weapon imaginable, the crushing, unstoppable machinery of federal justice. I was ready to lock the trap. The speakerphone in the center of the metal table chirped to life, breaking the mechanical hum of the conference room. Dominic leaned forward and tapped the glowing green button. On the other end of the line was an assistant United States attorney. Dominic quickly summarized the forensic package I had provided, detailing the forged power of attorney, the stolen two-factor authentication code, and the impending wire transfers to the luxury real estate escrow and the Internal Revenue Service portal. The federal prosecutor was silent for a long moment before addressing me directly. She needed to verify that I fully understood the gravity of a controlled financial delivery. She explained that in a standard sting operation, federal agents might allow a shipment of contraband to reach its destination to capture the entire distribution network. We were going to apply that exact same methodology to my $700,000 trust fund. "We are going to let the wire walk," the prosecutor stated, her voice crisp and authoritative over the speaker. "But to make these charges stick with absolute certainty, we need the hostile actors to execute the final push. They have to believe they are forcing this transaction through the banking security protocols themselves." Agent Foster turned his monitor so I could see the statutory breakdowns he was compiling. He pointed to the legal definitions of the crimes my family was about to finalize. "We are looking at a textbook execution of Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1343, which covers wire fraud." Foster explained that wire fraud does not just mean stealing money. It requires the transmission of electronic data across state lines to execute a fraudulent scheme. Because my bank servers were located in Illinois, and the Department of the Treasury servers were located in Virginia the moment the transaction processed, it became an irrefutable federal offense. But the hammer, Dominic added, leaning against the table, is the aggravated identity theft. Title 18, Section 1028A. Dominic explained that this specific statute was the nightmare scenario for white-collar criminals. Because Nia had used my personal social security number, intercepted my private authentication codes, and forged my digital signature during the commission of a felony, the law required a mandatory consecutive 2-year prison sentence. Judges had no discretion to reduce it. There was no parole, no early release for good behavior, and no high-priced defense attorney who could make it disappear. By attempting to shield herself from a federal tax lien, Nia was handing the government the exact tools they needed to put her away for over a decade. "And Bradley will go down as a co-conspirator," I noted, looking at the structural flowchart Foster had mapped out on the screen. "He is listed as the primary beneficiary on the real estate escrow account." He is actively participating in the laundering of the stolen funds. Exactly, Dominic agreed. Your parents will also face severe conspiracy charges for their physical role in the device theft and their ongoing attempts at extortion. But to lock this all into place, we need to lift the anti-money laundering flag without spooking them. We need a trigger mechanism. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Caldwell at the bank on a secure recorded line. I placed the phone next to the federal speaker box, linking the bank manager directly with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber Task Force. Caldwell was thoroughly professional, calmly listening as the prosecutor outlined the legal parameters of the sting operation. Caldwell explained the back-end mechanics of the banking software. He could manually lift the anti-money laundering freeze, but to ensure the chain of evidence was perfectly preserved, he suggested adding a secondary verification layer. He would push a notification to the user portal currently being monitored by my sister-in-law. The notification would state that due to the high volume of the transfer, a final physical signature was required to release the funds. It is a standard compliance protocol for flagged accounts, Caldwell explained over the phone. It will not look like a trap. It will just look like bureaucratic red tape. They will think they simply need one more signature to cross the finish line. Dominic nodded, his eyes meeting mine. That is the trigger. We tag the funds with a federal routing identifier. We let them demand that final signature from you. When you sign it, the bank releases the money. The federal trackers follow the cash into the escrow and tax portals, and the crime is permanently sealed in the federal database. There was a catch, however. The prosecutor warned me that to make the extortion charges stick alongside the fraud, I had to play the role of the compliant, broken victim. I could not show anger. I could not show strength. I had to let my family believe their psychological abuse was working. I had to let them threaten me, demean me, and force me to sign the final release document. They are going to escalate, Dominic warned, his voice turning serious. When they see that the bank requires a final in-person signature, they will panic. They are running out of time to pay off that tax lien. They will barrage you with messages. They will try to intimidate you. You have to absorb it all, agree to meet them, and hand over the signature. Can you do that? Can you sit in a room with the people trying to destroy you and pretend they have won? I looked at the digital evidence displayed across the monitors. I thought about my father threatening to commit me to a psychiatric ward. I thought about my mother staging fake tears at a lavish party funded by my stolen future. I thought about the sheer arrogance of a brother who believed he was entitled to my labor, and a sister-in-law who viewed human beings as nothing more than disposable assets. I do not need to pretend, I said, my voice cold and steady. I will give them exactly what they demand. I will let them drag me to a notary. I will let them scream their threats and hurl their insults. I will sign my name on the dotted line and smile while they steal my money. Dominic studied my face, clearly recognizing that I was operating with complete chilling detachment. The federal agents did not see a victim sitting at their table. They saw an architect preparing to demolish a building. Agent Foster began drafting the final authorization requests for the tracking tags. Caldwell confirmed the banking protocols were queued and waiting for my signal. The legal and technical structures of the controlled delivery were now fully operational. The steel jaws of the federal justice system were locked open, heavily baited with $700,000 of my own capital. All that remained was for my family to step onto the pressure plate. I stood up from the conference table and gathered my blazer. It was time to go back out into the world and wait for my phone to ring. The final act of their arrogance was about to begin. I left the federal building and stepped into the biting chill of the Chicago night. The drive back to my apartment was completely silent. I did not turn on the radio or listen to a podcast. I needed the quiet to prepare my mind for the psychological assault that was about to commence. Special Agent Dominic had been very clear. To secure the extortion charges, I had to let them attack me. I had to let them believe they were breaking my spirit. At precisely 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, Mr. Caldwell executed his part of the operation. He manually updated the status of the frozen $700,000 wire transfer. On my secure mirror of the banking portal, I watched the digital progress bar halt abruptly. The system generated a bright yellow alert banner. It read, "Action required. Voluntary transfer confirmation signature needed to release funds." An automated notification was immediately pushed to the fraudulent email address and phone number Nia had attached to the forged power of attorney. It took exactly 14 minutes for my phone to start vibrating against my kitchen counter. It did not stop for the next 3 hours. The first message came from my sister-in-law. It was sterile, demanding, and written with the exact same aggressive corporate tone she likely used to intimidate employees at her logistics firm. "Gwen, the bank is requesting a standard compliance document. It is a simple voluntary transfer confirmation form. We need you to sign this immediately. Do not delay this process. Bradley has a critical deadline tomorrow morning." I read the message while taking a sip of black coffee. I did not reply. 4 minutes later, a second text arrived from Nia. "I am not going to play games with you today, Gwen. Your father is extremely upset about your public display of instability yesterday. Signing this form right now is your only path back into this family. I have forwarded the document to your email. Print it, sign it, and send a picture." I let the phone sit on the granite counter. The beauty of silence is that it forces desperate people to fill the void. When silence stretches, arrogant people escalate. They cannot handle being ignored by someone they consider beneath them. 10 minutes passed. The screen lit up again, this time with a heavy barrage of texts from my mother. Brenda did not use corporate jargon. She used the suffocating weapon of maternal guilt. "Gwen, sweetheart, why are you doing this to us? Bradley is absolutely devastated. His whole future depends on this capital. You have so much and he has been struggling so hard. Why are you being so greedy with your own family?" Another message arrived seconds later. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You owe your brother this chance. Please stop being so incredibly selfish. The closing on the new house is tomorrow. You are actively destroying our family over money you do not even need to survive. How can you be so cold?" I stared at the glowing words. My mother was genuinely demanding a $700,000 payoff as back pay for providing basic childhood necessities. She was twisting the narrative so severely that my refusal to be robbed was somehow framed as an act of malicious greed. I took a screenshot of every single message and forwarded the batch directly to Agent Foster at the Cyber Division. Each text was another concrete brick in their federal extortion charge. Nia lost her patience 30 minutes later. Her messages shifted from corporate demands to outright legal threats, perfectly demonstrating the exact extortion Dominic needed to lock the case down tight. "Gwen, if you do not sign this release form by noon today, we will take drastic action. Howard is prepared to contact his legal team and initiate the involuntary psychiatric hold we discussed yesterday. We will also hold you personally liable for the financial damages to Bradley's real estate holding company. We are trying to handle your mental decline privately, but if you force our hand, we will destroy your professional reputation. Sign the form." I set my coffee mug down. They had delivered everything the federal prosecutor asked for. They had documented their intent to force a fraudulent transaction using threats of fraudulent medical imprisonment and career sabotage. They were demanding I sign a document explicitly titled "Voluntary Transfer Confirmation," while actively threatening to ruin my life if I refused. The sheer stupidity of committing federal extortion over text message was staggering, but desperate criminals rarely make intelligent choices. It was time to play my role. I had to be the broken, compliant victim. I had to let them taste victory so they would march blindly into the trap. I picked up my phone and formulated a response that conveyed total defeat. I kept my sentences short and devoid of punctuation, mimicking the typing style of someone who was emotionally exhausted and terrified. "I cannot fight you all anymore," I typed. "I am so tired of this. I just want it to stop. I will sign the form. Where do you want me to do it?" The response from Nia was instantaneous. The sheer speed of her reply betrayed her massive relief. She thought she had won. She thought the psychological pressure had successfully shattered my defenses. "We are not doing this over email," Nia texted back. The bank requires a physically notarized copy because of the transfer size. Meet us at the Oak Brook Notary and Title Office at 2 this afternoon. Howard and Brenda will be there. Do not be late, Gwen. Let us get this over with so you can get the mental health help you clearly need. I read the address she provided. It was a commercial notary office located just a few miles from the luxury estate they were trying to purchase. I forwarded the time and location to Dominic. He replied a minute later with a single word confirming the details. I walked to my bathroom mirror and looked at my reflection. I needed to look the part of a woman on the verge of a breakdown. I tied my hair back into a messy knot. I skipped my usual makeup routine, allowing the dark circles under my eyes to show prominently. I chose a plain, slightly wrinkled gray sweater instead of my usual tailored professional attire. My family wanted a victim to sacrifice. They wanted a weak, paranoid daughter they could manipulate and discard. I was going to walk into that notary office and give them the exact performance they demanded. I grabbed my car keys and headed out the door. The drive from Chicago to Oak Brook took 45 minutes. I spent the duration on a secure line with Special Agent Dominic. He briefed me on the surveillance net established around the commercial plaza. My family thought they had selected a random local business to finalize their theft. They had no idea they were walking into a fully monitored federal checkpoint. Dominic explained they intercepted the appointment booking. The notary was a legitimate state official completely unaware of the criminal context. However, the receptionist and the two clients, reading magazines in the waiting area, were undercover federal agents. They had placed high-definition recording devices in the lobby and the conference room reserved for our meeting. Your only job is to get their signatures on that document and sign your own name, Dominic instructed over the speaker. We have audio and visual feeds locked. Do not break character. Let them threaten you. Let them establish their intent beyond a reasonable doubt. The moment you sign, the bank will lift the hold. We will track the wire to the Internal Revenue Service portal and the escrow account. Once the funds clear the Federal Reserve, the crime is sealed. I parked my sedan in the back of the commercial lot, taking a moment to steady my breathing. I needed my hands to tremble slightly. I needed my voice to waver. I rubbed my eyes hard until they were red and watery. My family wanted a broken woman, and I was going to give them an award-winning performance. I walked into the glass-fronted building. The lobby was bright and sterile. I spotted my mother and father sitting on a leather sofa. Bradley and Nia stood by the reception desk. A man and a woman in business casual attire sat nearby, quietly tapping on their phones. To anyone else, they were just local residents waiting for a notary stamp. To me, they were the cavalry. Brenda stood up the moment the glass door clicked shut behind me. She took in my wrinkled sweater, my messy hair, and my red eyes. A look of supreme satisfaction washed over her face. She hurried over and grabbed my shoulders, her grip tight enough to bruise. "Gwen, look at yourself," Brenda said loudly, ensuring everyone in the lobby could hear her fake concern. "You are a complete mess. This is exactly why your father and I had to intervene. You are clearly incapable of caring for yourself right now. We are doing this to save you." I let my shoulders slump. I looked down at the floor, forcing my voice to tremble. "I just want this to be over. I am tired of fighting. Please just tell me what to sign so I can go home and sleep." Howard stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He looked like a king surveying his conquered territory. "You are doing the right thing, Gwen. It is about time you stopped this selfish rebellion and remembered your place in this family. Bradley needs this capital to secure his future. You have more than enough, and you are clearly not in the right state of mind to manage it anyway." Nia walked over holding a thick manila folder. Her corporate arrogance radiated from her every pore. She motioned for us to follow the notary into a small glass-walled conference room. The undercover receptionist gave me a brief, imperceptible nod as we passed the desk. We sat around a heavy oak table. The notary, a polite older woman, placed a stack of papers in front of me. She explained that this document was a voluntary transfer confirmation, verifying that I was of sound mind and willingly authorizing the release of $700,000 from my locked account to the designated routing numbers. I picked up the pen. My hand shook violently. I let the pen drop onto the table and buried my face in my hands. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing out a few desperate tears. "I do not want to do this," I whispered, making sure my voice carried clearly to the hidden microphones. "That money is my retirement. It is my entire life savings. You are taking everything I have worked for." Bradley rolled his eyes and let out an exasperated sigh. "Gwen, stop being so dramatic. You work on computers all day. You can just make more money. I have a major real estate deadline tomorrow. If you blow this deal for me, I will never forgive you." Naya leaned across the table, invading my personal space. Her eyes were cold and dead. "Gwen, we discussed this over text message. If you refuse to sign this document right now, your father is calling his legal team to initiate a psychiatric hold. You will be locked in a hospital. We will take the money anyway through the medical power of attorney, and we will make sure your employer knows exactly how unstable you are. You will lose your job, your apartment, and your freedom. Sign the paper, or we will destroy you." It was perfect. It was the most beautiful, clear-cut case of federal extortion I could have ever hoped for. Naya had just explicitly threatened me with fraudulent medical imprisonment and career sabotage to force a financial transaction. The undercover agents monitoring the audio feed in the other room must have been taking meticulous notes. Howard pounded his fist on the oak table. "Do not test us, Gwen. We are out of patience. Pick up the pen and sign your name." I looked up, my eyes wide and fearful. I let out a shaky breath, picking up the pen with trembling fingers. I looked at my mother, giving her one last chance to show a single ounce of maternal decency. Brenda just smiled, a cold, triumphant smirk, and tapped the signature line with her manicured fingernail. I slowly lowered the pen to the paper and signed the document, handing them their absolute criminal destruction. The notary, completely oblivious to the massive federal trap she had just helped spring, slowly pulled the document toward her. She pressed her heavy ink stamp onto the page, the loud thud echoing in the small glass conference room. She handed the original copy to Nia, who snatched it from the table with the speed of a striking snake. The performance was officially over. My family no longer needed to pretend they cared about my mental well-being. The sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room was palpable. Nia did not even bother to say thank you to the notary. She immediately flipped open her sleek silver laptop on the heavy oak table, her manicured fingers flying across the keyboard to access the banking portal. Her posture transformed from aggressive intimidation to absolute triumphant arrogance. She adjusted the collar of her tailored white dress, completely ignoring my presence as she scanned the screen. "It is uploading the verification now," Nia announced to Bradley, her voice brimming with undeniable superiority. "I told you I could handle the compliance protocols. The system is verifying the physical signature against the fraud alert. We should see the anti-money laundering hold release momentarily." Bradley let out a massive breath, sagging against the glass wall of the conference room. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and grinned instantly, recovering his unearned swagger. He looked at me, shaking his head as if I were a stubborn child who had thrown a tantrum over a broken toy. "See how simple that was? Gwen, was that so hard? You made a massive scene at the housewarming party for absolutely nothing. You embarrassed yourself in front of my investors. Now the money is exactly where it belongs, doing real work for the family portfolio instead of sitting idle in your useless checking account." My father, Howard, stepped forward proudly, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated condescension. He truly believed he had just taught me a valuable lesson in family hierarchy and financial management. "You need to understand that this is for your own good," Howard lectured, his deep voice filling the small room. "You have always been far too independent for your own good, Gwen. You isolate yourself in that city apartment, staring at computer screens all day, hoarding your little paychecks. That is not how legacy wealth operates. A family functions as a singular unit. When your brother requires capital to finalize a massive acquisition, we do not ask questions. We provide the capital. You should be thanking us for integrating your isolated assets into a genuine business enterprise. I remained seated, keeping my shoulders hunched and my eyes downcast. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Howard was lecturing me about legacy wealth, while completely ignorant of the fact that his brilliant daughter-in-law was about to wire over $500,000 to the federal government to avoid a criminal indictment. He actually thought Bradley was buying a multi-million-dollar estate with legitimate business funds. The level of delusion was absolutely breathtaking. I let a small, pathetic sob escape my lips, ensuring the hidden federal microphones captured my supposed devastation. Nia glanced up from her laptop, her dark eyes flashing with cruel amusement. "Oh, let her cry, Howard," Nia said, waving her hand dismissively. "She is just realizing that her little graphic design career does not make her untouchable. You thought because you built some software interfaces you were smarter than us, Gwen. You thought you could hide $700,000 from this family. But corporate finance requires real intellect. It requires knowing how to navigate complex systems and utilize legal leverage. You just color in digital buttons. As an executive director, I manage actual corporate infrastructure. I know exactly how the real world operates. You were completely out of your depth the moment you tried to fight us." The irony of her statement was so heavy it felt tangible. Nia was lecturing me on corporate infrastructure while utilizing a stolen identity to execute federal wire fraud right in front of undercover agents. I kept my head down, letting my silence feed their massive egos. Brenda walked over and patted my back, her touch cold and entirely devoid of genuine affection. She pulled out a compact mirror and checked her lipstick, already mentally calculating how quickly she could return to her wealthy friends at the country club. She did not care about the devastation she had just caused. "Now, Gwen, go home and get some rest," Brenda ordered briskly, snapping her compact shut. "We will call you next week after Bradley and Nia are fully settled into the new mansion. We will find you a nice therapist to talk to about your paranoia. Maybe we can even get you a prescription to calm your nerves. You have been terribly unpleasant today, but as your parents, we forgive you. Just remember that everything we do is because we love you. We are protecting your future." The notary cleared her throat, looking extremely uncomfortable with the toxic family dynamic playing out. She gathered her stamp and excused herself. The moment the glass door closed behind her, Nia let out a sharp, victorious laugh. She turned the laptop screen toward Bradley. The status indicator on the banking portal had shifted. The bright yellow warning banner vanished, replaced by a solid green checkmark. The final digital security barrier was completely gone. "The hold is officially lifted," Nia announced, her voice trembling with pure adrenaline. The system accepted the notarized release form. "The funds are unlocked and moving to the external routing destinations right now. The Internal Revenue Service portal is showing the transfer as initiated. The title company escrow account is receiving the rest." "We are clear, Bradley. We are completely clear." They had done it. They had pushed the final button and sealed their fate. I remained seated at the heavy oak table, watching the glow of the laptop screen illuminate Nia's face. The progress bar on the banking portal shifted from processing to completed. In the world of digital finance, that single graphical change represents a massive, irreversible cascade of automated events. I knew exactly what was happening behind the interface. My bank's holding servers were communicating directly with the Federal Reserve routing network. The electronic packets containing my $700,000 were being sliced into two distinct streams, flying across state lines at the speed of light through the automated clearinghouse system. For anyone else, watching their life savings vanish into the ether would induce sheer panic. For me, it was the ultimate confirmation of a successful federal sting. Nia hit the refresh button on her email client. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Suddenly, a bold notification popped up on her screen. It was an automated receipt from the United States Department of the Treasury. The subject line confirmed the successful receipt of $450,000 applied directly to her specific taxpayer identification number. The pending tax lien, the massive federal threat that had been hanging over her head for months, was officially marked as satisfied. Nia let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She slammed her hand down on the table, her corporate composure entirely shattering for a fraction of a second. The federal government has the money, Nia announced, turning the screen, so Bradley could see the government seal on the digital receipt. The audit is closed. We are completely out of the woods. I do not owe them a single cent anymore. Bradley pumped his fist in the air, pulling his wife into a tight embrace. He looked over her shoulder, his eyes locking onto the secondary confirmation email that arrived seconds later. It was from the luxury real estate brokerage in Oak Brook. The title company had successfully received the remaining $250,000 into their escrow account. "The broker says the funds are verified," Bradley shouted, his voice echoing loudly in the small glass room. "The down payment is secured. The mansion is officially ours. We close the final paperwork tomorrow morning, and nobody can touch the equity. We did it." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap. I watched them celebrate their perceived victory, completely unaware of the absolute devastation they had just orchestrated for themselves. By accepting that email receipt from the Internal Revenue Service, Nia had just provided federal investigators with irrefutable proof that she used stolen funds to pay off an existing criminal penalty. By routing the remaining capital into an escrow account across state lines, using a forged power of attorney, Bradley had officially cemented his role as a co-conspirator in federal wire fraud. The money had landed. The federal trap was completely locked. Howard slapped Bradley on the back, his face beaming with the kind of pride he had never once shown me. "Outstanding work," son Howard boomed. "This is exactly how you execute high-level business maneuvers. You identified a capital resource, you secured it through legal channels, and you executed the transaction to protect the family portfolio. I am incredibly proud of you." Brenda wiped a genuine tear of joy from her cheek. She walked over and hugged Nia tightly, ignoring me entirely. "Oh, I knew we could fix this," Brenda cooed. "I knew if we just took control of the situation, everything would work out perfectly. Now we can finally focus on celebrating. We need to plan the ultimate debt-free victory party at the new estate." Nia nodded, her sharp features returning to their usual arrogant state. Wednesday night, Nia declared, looking directly at me. "We will host an exclusive gathering at the mansion. All of Howard's country club friends. Bradley's new investor contacts everyone who matters. We are going to show this entire city that our family is untouchable." She slowly closed her silver laptop and slid it into her designer tote bag. She looked down at me, her eyes filled with cold, predatory satisfaction. "You can go back to your sad, isolated little life now, Gwen. You served your purpose. Do not bother showing up on Wednesday. You are clearly not mentally equipped to handle high society events, and frankly, you would just embarrass us. We will ensure the family office sends you a small monthly stipend so you do not starve in your apartment." I stood up slowly, making sure my movements appeared sluggish and defeated. I kept my gaze fixed firmly on the floor. "Thank you," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "I just want to go home." Howard sneered, adjusting his expensive tie. "Make sure she gets to her car, Brenda. We do not want her wandering around the parking lot and causing another scene. We have secured what we needed. Let her wallow in her own misery." My parents and my brother walked out of the glass conference room without a single backward glance. They marched through the lobby like conquering royalty, completely ignoring the undercover federal agents who were sitting quietly in the waiting area. Nia followed close behind them, her designer heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. She had just stolen my entire fortune, and she believed she had gotten away with the perfect crime. I remained in the conference room until the heavy glass door of the building swung shut behind them. The moment they were out of sight, my slumped posture vanished. I stood up straight, rolling my shoulders back to release the physical tension of my performance. My eyes were completely dry, my hands were perfectly steady. The undercover receptionist stood up from her desk and walked over to the glass wall of the conference room. She tapped twice on the glass, giving me a sharp, confirming nod. The two agents who had been pretending to read magazines in the lobby quietly packed up their equipment. My phone buzzed in my blazer pocket. I pulled it out and answered the secure line. "We have it," Special Agent Dominic said, his voice crackling with absolute certainty over the connection. The bank just confirmed the tracking tags attached to the Capital. The Internal Revenue Service portal flagged the incoming wire transfer exactly as we anticipated, and the real estate escrow account is fully monitored. The money is secured on the back end. They think they paid off their debt, but they just handed the federal government the murder weapon. I looked out the window, watching my father's leased luxury vehicle pull out of the parking lot and merge onto the busy street. They were driving back to their stolen mansion, giddy with the thrill of their successful heist. "When do we execute the warrants?" I asked, my voice cold and precise. Dominic did not hesitate. "Your sister-in-law just invited all of their wealthy friends to a victory party on Wednesday night. We are going to let them buy the expensive champagne. We are going to let them put on their best suits and dresses, and then we are going to crash the party." I ended the call and walked out of the notary office into the bright afternoon sun. The hardest part was over. I had survived the psychological abuse, the threats, and the sheer cruelty of my own parents. I had played the victim flawlessly, handing them the rope they so desperately demanded. Now all I had to do was wait for Wednesday night. The dominoes were perfectly aligned, and I was going to push the very first one myself. Wednesday evening arrived with a suffocating humidity that wrapped around the wealthy suburbs of Oakbrook like a heavy blanket. From my hidden vantage point, parked 2 blocks away in an unmarked black utility vehicle, I could see the glow of the massive crystal chandeliers illuminating the grand front windows of the mansion. The victory party was in full swing. My family was celebrating the successful theft of my entire life savings, completely oblivious to the federal strike team assembling quietly in the surrounding neighborhood. I sat in the back of the surveillance vehicle next to Special Agent Dominic. He was dressed in full tactical gear, a stark contrast to the tailored business suit he had worn during our initial meeting. Multiple digital monitors glowed in the dim interior of the van, displaying live feeds from hidden cameras placed strategically around the estate perimeter. Agent Foster sat at the control terminal monitoring the audio frequencies. The federal trap was locked, loaded, and waiting for my signal. "Are you ready for this?" Dominic asked, his voice low and steady. "Once you walk through those doors and initiate contact, the operation goes live. We will give you exactly 4 minutes to establish their possession of the stolen assets before we breach the perimeter." I smoothed the lapels of my dark crimson blazer. I did not dress like a victim tonight. I dressed like an executioner. "I am ready," I replied. "Let them enjoy their final toast." I stepped out of the tactical vehicle and walked down the quiet, tree-lined street toward the iron gates of the estate. The heavy bass of a live jazz band throbbed through the humid air. The driveway was absolutely packed with luxury vehicles. Valets in crisp white shirts sprinted back and forth, tossing keys and opening doors for the Chicago elite. My parents had invited everyone. Country club executives, regional banking directors, and wealthy socialites were all gathered to witness the triumphant rise of Bradley and his brilliant wife, Nia. They had built an entire social empire on a foundation of federal wire fraud, and they were flaunting it with breathtaking arrogance. I bypassed the valet stand and walked straight through the massive iron gates. The security guard at the front entrance barely glanced at me, assuming I was just another wealthy guest arriving late. I pushed open the towering mahogany double doors and stepped into the grand foyer. The sheer opulence of the event was staggering. Waiters circulated with silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and expensive hors d'oeuvres. Laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings. My family had transformed my $700,000 trust fund into an obscene display of manufactured success. I moved silently through the crowded living room, my eyes tracking the key targets. My father Howard was standing by the marble fireplace holding a glass of aged bourbon. He was loudly recounting a fabricated story about Bradley's brilliant market acquisition strategies to a group of mesmerized investors. Howard looked incredibly smug, completely intoxicated by the social validation he was receiving from his wealthy peers. He had sacrificed his own daughter without a second thought, and he was currently wearing that betrayal like a badge of honor. On the opposite side of the room, my mother Brenda was holding court with a circle of heavily jeweled women. She wore a stunning emerald green gown that easily cost thousands of dollars. She laughed brightly, waving her hand dismissively as she bragged about her son's new estate and her daughter-in-law's impeccable corporate connections. Brenda was thriving in her element, perfectly comfortable standing on the wreckage of my future to elevate her own status. But the true stars of the evening were out on the back patio. I navigated through the sliding glass doors and stepped into the warm evening air. Bradley and Nia stood by the illuminated infinity pool, surrounded by an eager crowd of admirers. Bradley wore a custom-tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the successful tech founder he pretended to be. He clinked glasses with a local real estate developer, loudly discussing plans for future expansions and phantom investment portfolios. Nia stood beside him, radiating pure predatory triumph. She wore a sleek, backless black evening gown, her hair perfectly styled, her sharp features glowing with unearned superiority. She had successfully navigated an Internal Revenue Service tax lien and a massive corporate embezzlement scandal, all by hijacking my identity and draining my bank accounts. She genuinely believed she had outsmarted the federal government. She believed she was untouchable. I walked directly toward the center of the patio, my crimson blazer cutting a sharp path through the sea of neutral party attire. I did not try to blend in. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to feel the sudden jarring disruption of my presence. The first person to spot me was Brenda. She had wandered out onto the patio to join the celebration. Her eyes locked onto mine, and the bright artificial smile instantly dropped from her face. She froze, her champagne glass hovering inches from her lips. "Gwen," Brenda hissed, rushing forward to block my path before I could reach the pool area. Her voice was low-laced with absolute fury and panic. "What are you doing here? You were explicitly told not to come. You are ruining the aesthetic of the evening. Get out before you embarrass your brother in front of these important people." I did not stop walking. I simply stepped around her, forcing her to stumble backward in her expensive heels. "I am not here to embarrass anyone, Brenda," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the jazz music. "I am just here to admire the renovations. I paid for them after all." Howard heard my voice and quickly abandoned his conversation by the fireplace, marching out onto the patio with heavy, aggressive steps. He grabbed my upper arm, his grip bruising and hostile. "You need to leave right now." Howard tightened his grip on my arm. "You need to leave right now," he hissed, glancing nervously at the guests who were beginning to notice the commotion. I yanked my arm out of his grasp with a sharp, violent motion. I did not break my stride. I walked directly toward the illuminated infinity pool where Bradley and Nia were holding court. The jazz band was playing a lively tune, but the atmosphere around the pool grew instantly cold as I approached. Bradley stopped laughing. Nia narrowed her eyes, stepping in front of her husband like a shield. "What part of family only did you not understand?" Nia demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You are trespassing. We own this estate now. The ink on the deed is dry, and you have absolutely no right to be here." "I have every right," I said, projecting my voice so the surrounding investors and real estate developers could hear. "I am just checking on my investment. $700,000 is a massive amount of capital to drop into a title escrow account and an Internal Revenue Service tax portal on a Monday morning. I wanted to make sure my stolen trust fund bought you exactly what you wanted." The word "stolen" hung in the humid air. The surrounding guests fell completely silent. The clinking of glasses ceased entirely. Bradley let out a forced, nervous laugh, looking around at his wealthy friends. "She is having an episode," he announced to the crowd, tapping his temple. "My sister has been struggling with severe paranoia. We had to take over her finances legally for her own protection. She is completely delusional." Nia crossed her arms, leaning forward with absolute corporate arrogance. "You signed the voluntary transfer confirmation yourself, Gwen. We have the notarized document. The bank released the funds legally. The federal tax lien is paid off and this house is ours. You handed over the money because you knew you owed this family for raising you. Now get off my property before I have you arrested." I checked my watch. 3 minutes and 45 seconds had passed. They had just publicly admitted to using my funds to pay off a federal tax debt and secure a real estate purchase, citing a fraudulently obtained document. "I do not think I will be the one getting arrested tonight, Naya," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. Exactly 15 seconds later, the massive front iron gates of the estate were violently thrust open. The sound of heavy tactical boots hitting the cobblestone driveway echoed like thunder. The live jazz band abruptly stopped playing mid-note. "Federal agents. Nobody move." A booming voice echoed through the grand foyer and spilled out onto the back patio. The guests panicked. Wealthy socialites shrieked and spilled their champagne. Investors backed away from the bar, holding their hands up in the air. Through the open sliding glass doors, a dozen heavily armed federal agents wearing dark tactical gear swarmed into the mansion. They moved with terrifying precision, securing all exits and locking down the perimeter. The lavish catering staff backed away into the kitchen, abandoning their silver trays. The entire estate, which had been buzzing with arrogant celebration just minutes prior, was now paralyzed by the crushing reality of federal law enforcement. Special Agent Dominic strode onto the patio. He was no longer the polite investigator I had met in the federal building. He was a predator who had just cornered his prey. His badge gleamed against his tactical vest. He locked eyes with me for a fraction of a second before turning his absolute devastating focus onto my family. Bradley and Nia. Dominic announced, his voice carrying the full crushing weight of the United States government. "Step away from the pool and keep your hands where I can see them." The initial reaction from my family was pure, unadulterated denial. Their brains simply could not process that their manufactured reality was collapsing. Howard stepped forward, puffing out his chest and attempting to use his country club authority against a federal task force. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded, his face red with indignation. "Do you have any idea whose house you just broke into? I am personal friends with the chief of police. You are making a catastrophic mistake here. My lawyers will have your badges by tomorrow morning." Dominic did not even blink. He kept his eyes locked on Nia. "Save your legal threats for the federal judge during your arraignment hearing, Howard. You are all listed on the indictment. We do not answer to the local police. We answer to the Department of Justice." Brenda ran toward Howard, clutching his arm in sheer terror. "Howard, do something. Tell them to leave. They are ruining the party." Nia, operating on pure narcissistic instinct, attempted to implement her human resources crisis management strategy. She took a step toward Dominic, her posture radiating arrogant defiance. "Agent, there has obviously been a massive administrative error," Nia stated smoothly, attempting to project corporate authority. "If this is about the tax lien, I can assure you that the balance was paid in full on Monday morning. I have the digital receipts from the Treasury Department. Whatever flag triggered your system is completely invalid." Bradley nodded frantically from behind her, sweat pouring down his face. "Yes, exactly. My wife settled the account. We just closed on this house today. All the capital is fully verified by the bank. We have a notarized power of attorney from my sister proving she transferred the funds voluntarily. She is mentally unstable and making false reports." Dominic stopped a few feet away from them. He pulled a thick folded document from his tactical vest. It was not a simple search warrant, it was a federal indictment. "We are perfectly aware that the tax lien was paid," Dominic said, his voice dropping into a register that sent chills down the spines of everyone listening. "We monitored the exact moment the funds entered the federal portal. The problem is that the United States government takes extreme offense when you use stolen identity credentials and forged legal documents to launder money through their internal revenue systems." Nia's confident facade cracked. Her eyes darted toward me, then back to the federal agent. "It was not stolen," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "Gwen signed the release herself. We have the document." "You have a controlled delivery receipt," Dominic corrected sharply. "Your sister-in-law has been working as a cooperating witness with the Cyber Financial Crimes Division for the past 3 days. Every document you forged, every text message you sent, threatening to have her involuntarily committed, and every digital signature you bypassed has been monitored and recorded by the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words hit the patio like a bomb. The wealthy guests who had been mingling with my family just moments ago were now staring at them with absolute horror. The illusion of the successful tech founder and the brilliant corporate executive evaporated instantly. They were exposed as desperate, pathetic frauds in front of the exact high society crowd they had tried so hard to impress. Bradley let out a high-pitched sound of pure panic. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a lounge chair. He looked at Nia, his eyes wide with cowardice and betrayal. "I did not do it," Bradley screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly at his wife. "It was all her idea. She works in human resources. She got the notary software. She stole the verification code from Gwen's phone. I just needed the money for the house. I did not know she was going to commit federal wire fraud." Nia whipped her head around to stare at her husband. The look of pure, concentrated venom on her face could have melted steel. "You spineless coward," she spat. "You were begging your parents for cash because you bankrupted your third fake company in a row. You gladly signed the escrow papers knowing exactly where that money came from." In the span of 30 seconds, the golden child threw the love of his life directly under the bus to save his own skin, and she immediately dragged him down with her. It was the most pathetic display of weakness I had ever witnessed, and it was absolutely perfect. Dominic raised a gloved hand, instantly silencing their pathetic bickering. The federal agent did not care about their marital disputes. He cared about the financial trap they had willingly triggered. "You both seem to misunderstand the severity of your situation," Dominic stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "This morning, when the bank released the anti-money laundering hold, we attached a federal tracking identifier to every single dollar that left the vault. The moment your transaction hit the Internal Revenue Service portal to pay off your corporate embezzlement penalty, you committed wire fraud against the United States Treasury. And when you moved the rest of the stolen capital across state lines to close on this property, you officially engaged in high-level money laundering." Nia visibly swayed on her feet. The remaining color drained from her sharp features as the devastating reality of the federal tracking tags set in. She had not just stolen money, she had processed federally marked capital through a government agency. "And since you utilized Gwen's social security number and intercepted her digital security codes to bypass the bank's authentication protocols," Dominic continued, signaling to the tactical agents waiting behind him, "we are adding aggravated identity theft to the indictment. That carries a mandatory consecutive federal prison sentence. You are looking at decades behind bars." Bradley fell to his knees on the expensive patio stone. He looked up at our parents, who were standing frozen in absolute terror by the infinity pool. Howard and Brenda could do nothing to save their golden child. Their country club connections and suburban wealth meant absolutely nothing against the crushing weight of a federal warrant. "Mom, do something!" Bradley sobbed, his voice cracking like a terrified child. "Tell them I did not know. Tell them it was all Nia. I cannot go to prison. I am a business owner." Brenda opened her mouth, but Agent Foster stepped forward, holding up a sleek digital tablet. "I would strongly advise against saying anything right now," Foster warned my mother. "We have your text messages demanding the transfer, and we have the audio recordings of you threatening your daughter at the notary office. If you attempt to obstruct this investigation or cover for your son, you will be joining them in the transport van for federal conspiracy." My mother slammed her mouth shut. She looked at Bradley, her favorite child, the son she had bankrupted herself to protect, and she took a deliberate step backward. She abandoned him instantly to save her own reputation. "Take them down," Dominic ordered. The tactical agents moved in with brutal efficiency. They grabbed Bradley by the arms, hauled him to his feet, and slammed his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing across the patio was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Nia did not fight. She stood perfectly rigid as the cold steel clamped around her wrists, her corporate arrogance entirely extinguished. As the federal agents marched them through the grand foyer and out the front doors, the remaining guests scrambled toward the exits in absolute silence. The glamorous victory party had completely dissolved into an active crime scene. I watched the flashing red and blue lights of the tactical vehicles illuminate the immaculate landscaping, painting my parents' horrified faces in harsh alternating colors. They stood shivering by the edge of the infinity pool, watching their golden child get shoved into the back of a federal transport van. I did not stay to offer them comfort. I turned around, walked out the side gate, and went home to sleep peacefully for the first time in days. The federal justice system moves with a terrifying and inescapable momentum. Over the next 8 months, the legal fallout was absolute. Nia attempted to leverage her remaining corporate connections to secure a lenient plea deal, but the prosecution package I had provided left her defense attorneys no room to maneuver. The digital forensics were undeniable. She pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and massive corporate embezzlement. The judge handed down a severe sentence of 12 years in a federal penitentiary. Because it was a federal conviction, there was no possibility of early release for good behavior. Her corporate career, her pristine reputation, and her freedom were permanently eradicated. Bradley cowardly maintained his stance that he was merely a clueless victim of his wife's financial manipulation. He cooperated fully with the authorities, eagerly turning over every document and password they requested to save his own skin. His sheer incompetence actually worked in his favor, proving to investigators that he lacked the basic intelligence required to orchestrate the sophisticated cyber attack. Still, he had knowingly signed the real estate escrow documents funded by stolen money. He received a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. My parents faced a different kind of total destruction. Howard and Brenda narrowly avoided federal prison by proving they lacked the technical capacity to execute the digital routing of the stolen funds. However, defending themselves against the initial federal conspiracy charges completely bankrupted them. They were forced to liquidate all their remaining assets, including their leased luxury vehicles and their sprawling suburban home, just to pay their elite defense attorneys. Their country club revoked their membership immediately. Their wealthy friends entirely ostracized them. They went from being the elite socialites of Chicago to destitute outcasts living in a cramped rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. During the trial preparations, my phone logged dozens of pathetic, desperate voicemails from both of them. Howard would call, his previously booming voice reduced to a frail whimper, begging me to speak to the prosecutors on their behalf. Brenda left sobbing messages crying that they had lost everything and asking if I could just send them a small monthly allowance to help with their rent. I listened to every single voicemail, smiled, and sent them directly to my lawyer to secure a permanent restraining order. Because my stolen assets had been officially tagged by federal investigators during the controlled delivery operation, the recovery process was remarkably smooth. The United States Treasury reversed the fraudulent tax payment immediately, and the title company was legally compelled to return the escrow deposit directly to my primary account. Within 3 weeks of the arrests, every single cent of my $700,000 was safely returned to my possession. Mr. Caldwell, my bank manager, personally oversaw the transfer and implemented a new biometric security protocol on my portfolio that no one but me could ever authorize. Having my life savings restored brought me an incredible sense of peace, but I knew I wanted to do something more meaningful with the victory. I took $50,000 from the recovered funds and donated it directly to a national nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting victims of familial identity theft and financial exploitation. I wanted to ensure that other people who found themselves targeted by greedy relatives had access to the legal resources and investigative tools they needed to fight back. As for my own life, the absolute removal of my toxic family allowed me to thrive in ways I never thought possible. Without the constant draining pressure of managing their expectations and dealing with their manufactured crises, my career skyrocketed. I was promoted to a lead executive director position at my financial technology firm, overseeing global interface security protocols. I upgraded my apartment to a beautiful penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. I built a solid, chosen family composed of genuine friends, trusted colleagues, and people who respected my personal boundaries. I even kept Cole, the private investigator, on a permanent retainer for my corporate audits, and we frequently meet for coffee to laugh about the sheer stupidity of arrogant criminals. My biological relatives thought they could use my quiet nature against me. They assumed that because I was introverted and hardworking, I would simply roll over and let them take everything I had built to save their precious golden child. They confused my silence with weakness. They found out the hard way that the quietest people in the room are often the ones paying the most attention. They thought that family was a magic word that gave them a free pass to commit federal felonies without facing the consequences. But the justice system does not care about your bloodline, and neither do I.